All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about a true creative giant, Mike Nichols. And we're going to do it through the eyes of the people who knew him best, based on the incredible book, Life Isn't Everything. This is the story of an artist who, get this, escaped the Nazis, completely changed the game in comedy, and then took over Hollywood, all while fighting some pretty serious inner demons.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start at the very beginning, with his absolutely harrowing escape from Nazi Germany when he was just a kid. Then we'll get into how he teamed up with Elaine May to basically turn the whole comedy world on its head. After that, Hollywood, of course. But we're not just going to stop at the fame. We'll pull back the curtain and really try to understand the man himself. And we'll wrap up with his amazing return to the stage and the incredible legacy he left for all of us.
So with a life that huge, where do you even begin? Well, for Mike Nichols, it doesn't start with the bright lights or the awards. It starts with survival.
Okay, so his birth name was Mikhail Igor Peshkovsky, and he was born in Berlin back in 1931. Can you imagine? At just 7 years old, he had to flee Nazi Germany. He shows up in New York with basically nothing. And that experience, well, it became the absolute core of who he was. It left him with this really deep sense of survivor's guilt, But it also gave him his greatest weapon, humor. It was like armor for him, a way to deal with this crazy new world while still haunted by the one he was forced to leave behind.
His childhood world was just full of these crazy contradictions. On one hand, you have his mother's Yiddish lullabies, and on the other, the glitz and glamour of Hollywood musicals. And then, something really traumatic happened. He got sick at age 4 and lost all his hair. That made him hyper-aware of how he looked, of performance, really, from a super young age. So, to handle being so shy, what does he do? He develops this razor-sharp wit and starts doing these incredible impersonations to connect with people. And right there, you can see the two things that would drive his entire life, this desperate, deep need to fit in, and an equally strong need to stand out.
And that desire to stand out, well, it found the perfect place to explode in college. A chance meeting in Chicago, it wasn't just going to change his life. It was about to change American comedy, forever.
Yeah, the University of Chicago, that's really where Mike Nichols found himself. He just dove headfirst into everything, philosophy, avant-garde theater, you name it. But the biggest discovery he made there, it wasn't in a textbook, it was a person. The second he met Elaine May, the chemistry was just electric. And just like that, one of the greatest comedy duos of all time was born.
Everything he was learning just fed right into his art. Philosophy taught him to always look for the subtext, what's really being said underneath the words. And on stage, he completely fell in love with improv. His classmates, well, they saw both sides of him, the intense artist who'd literally throw a chair to get a real reaction, and the charming guy who could win over any room with a single joke.
In just 4 years, it was a whirlwind. From 1958 to 1962, Nichols and May didn't just get famous, they blew the doors off American comedy. Their Broadway show, An Evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May, wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural sensation. And they had the hardware to prove it, snagging both a Grammy and a Tony.
On stage, their chemistry was just unbelievable. His perfect timing set the stage for her lightning-fast wit. They were known for these marathon rehearsals, just fueled by coffee and sheer creativity. And the payoff was legendary. Audiences would go from this total stunned silence to what was described as seismic laughter. But behind the curtain, all that success created its own problems. For Nichols, there was this growing fear that fame was becoming a cage.
So right at the peak of their comedy fame, what does Nichols do? He does the unthinkable. He walks away, and he sets his sights on a whole new world he was determined to conquer, Hollywood.
I mean, you have to appreciate how insane this is. With absolutely zero experience directing film, none, Nichols directs two of the biggest movies of the 60s, back to back. First up was Barefoot in the Park, and then came The Graduate, a film that wasn't just a movie, it was a full-blown cultural phenomenon that shattered box office records and made Dustin Hoffman a star overnight. And his way of doing things was totally different. He had to masterfully talk a very reluctant Dustin Hoffman into playing the role that would define his career. He was a master at pushing for improv, even in huge scenes like the famous Seduction by Mrs. Robinson. The actors who worked with him had this perfect description for him, part spiritual guide, part drill sergeant. He'd push you to your absolute edge, but he was always right there, guiding you towards something real, something true. So now, he's the king of Hollywood. But, public success, that's only ever half the story. To really get Mike Nichols, you gotta look at the man who was behind the camera. Away from all the lights and the action, his life was this really complex tapestry of super intense relationships, but also this deep, guarded vulnerability. Looking at his 3 marriages, and especially his incredible bond with the journalist Diane Sawyer, you see a guy who was always searching for a real connection, but was often haunted by this feeling of being alone.
His friends remember him being an amazing, devoted father. Diane Sawyer talks about these endless late-night conversations they'd have about, everything, life, art, philosophy. But that perfectionism he had, it often turned into this restless self-doubt. And it all kind of comes back to that central struggle in his life. It didn't matter how many awards he won or how many records he broke. He still felt like that little boy who was in exile, never quite believing he'd truly made it home.
But even after taking over Hollywood, he never, ever forgot his first true love, the theater. So in the later part of his career, he went back to the stage, this time not just as a director, but as a total kingmaker.
Back on Broadway, he championed some of the most important plays of the entire generation. We're talking about landmark works by absolute legends like Tom Stoppard, David Hare, and Tony Kushner, including the massive, groundbreaking play, Angels in America. And he was so much more than just a director. He was a partner. He was right there in the trenches with them, staying up all night helping rewrite entire scenes. He had this incredible knack for balancing risky, daring art with what he knew would work for an audience. And on opening night, when everything was chaos, he was legendarily calm. The playwrights he worked with said his greatest gift was teaching them to trust what's not being said, the subtext, and to just embrace the magic of a moment that happened spontaneously.
Okay, so when you put it all together, the exile, the comedian, the groundbreaking director, what's the real legacy? That brings us to our final look at his mind, his art, and the impact he left behind.
People say his dinner parties were just legendary. I mean, imagine being there. You'd have movie stars, psychoanalysts, politicians, all arguing and debating passionately. For Nichols, this wasn't just a party, it was research. He had this endless curiosity about what makes people do what they do, and he basically used every conversation as a rehearsal for life, trying to figure out the inner worlds he wanted to put on stage.
His mind was just voracious. His library was packed with all the greats. And of course, the world took notice. He received the Kennedy Center Honor. He won an Emmy for directing the screen version of Angels in America. The awards were endless. But when you hear what his friends and colleagues said at his memorial, they didn't really talk about the trophies. They talked about his laugh, his incredible insight, and his absolute, unwavering commitment to finding the truth in every single story. And in the end, it seems like all the different voices in this story, the actors, the writers, his closest friends, they all land on the exact same idea about what made him a genius. Mike Nichols' gift was to make art feel like life itself. Which really just leaves us with one last thought. What is it that truly defines an artist's legacy? Is it the award shows, the box office numbers? Or is it something more? Is it the way they help us see ourselves a little more clearly? For Mike Nichols, it seems pretty obvious the answer is all of it. Thanks for joining us.